Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. TV star Jussie Smollett claimed to be the victim of a racist anti-gay attack at the hands of two Trump supporters. Virtually the entire news media and a parade of politicians immediately believed him and demanded the rest of us do so as well. Now that story is coming completely apart. According to police sources, Smollett actually orchestrated the entire attack himself. Elizabeth Wagmeister has been following this from the very beginning. She's a reporter at Variety and co-host of Page Six TV, and she joins us tonight. Elizabeth?
Hi, Tucker. So reports are swirling that the alleged hate crime against Empire star Jussie Smollett was all a hoax, with the actor staging the attack on himself. Two arrests were made late last week, and the Chicago Police Department officially named two Nigerian brothers as official suspects, not just persons of interest, on Friday. Hours later, both of the suspects were released without any charges filed due to new evidence which cleared the two brothers. With the turn of events, the Chicago PD wants to re-question Smollett, but I spoke with his publicist who told me today, quote, "There are no plans for Jussie Smollett to meet with Chicago police today. Any news reports suggesting otherwise are inaccurate." The brothers, who were initial suspects, were both extras on Empire. They were actors, and reportedly they knew Smollett, who told police that he was attacked by two white men on January 29th, with the assailants reportedly yelling homophobic and racial slurs, pouring bleach on him, and putting a rope around his neck. While police entered the two suspects' home with a search warrant in Chicago, they found a black mask, bleach bottles, and a script from Empire. Smollett's music manager told us exclusively at Variety that he was on the phone with his client during the incident, and he heard the slurs, which included an alleged attacker yelling, quote, "This is MAGA country." While police have not been able to confirm that Smollett was on the phone with his manager because he initially refused to turn over his cell phone, and then he ended up turning in heavily redacted phone records. Smollett is denying that the attack was staged, but reports have surfaced that he rehearsed the attack with the two Nigerian brothers and even paid them close to $4,000. The brothers fled for Nigeria the night of the attack, and they did not return into Chicago until the police picked them up at O'Hare Airport last week, and they began 2 days of questioning. Well, today, the two brothers spoke to a local Chicago affiliate, and this is what they said, quote, "We are not racist, we are not homophobic, and we are not anti-Trump. We are born and raised in Chicago, and we are American citizens." Lawyers for Smollett are standing by their client's story, saying, quote, "As a victim of a hate crime who has cooperated with the police investigation, Jussie Smollett is angered and devastated by recent reports that the perpetrators are individuals he is familiar with. He has now been further victimized by claims attributed to these alleged perpetrators that Jussie played a role in his own attack. Nothing is further from the truth, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying." That's from his lawyers.
Amazing story. Thanks very much for that update. Appreciate it. Almost 3,000 people were shot in the city of Chicago last year. Men, women, small children, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Many hundreds of them died. Not a single one of those people received anything like the attention the media have lavished on a relatively minor assault alleged by the television actor Jussie Smollett. On the other hand, none of Chicago's 3,000 shootings was even half as useful as Smollett's story. His story had everything. The national media long ago gave up the pretense of gathering news. Journalism is now explicitly a political job. The point of it is to enforce cultural orthodoxies and punish enemies. Jussie Smollett was the perfect vehicle for both of those things. Journalists pretended to be horrified as they recounted what he said happened to him, but secretly, they were thrilled.
There are many indications of a hate crime here. They are looking for two suspects who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats, though that has not yet been officially confirmed.
We don't know what happened to Jussie, but what we do know is that racism is alive and well in this country. There is real evidence of people who have done these crimes who cite that the president has inspired them.
The fact that it reportedly said this is MAGA country adds to sort of the atmosphere of menace that African Americans in particular and people of color in general have felt since the advent of the Trump administration.
And the media has really cast so much doubt on his story, which I find so personally offensive, that a gay black man is targeted and then suddenly he becomes the victim of people's disbelief. It's so outrageous to me.
He said his attackers hurled racial and homophobic slurs at him. And this is America in 2019.
This is America in 2019. To the national media, Smollett's story was the perfect metaphor for the Trump era. It was also, pretty clearly, a total crock. Smollett's account began to fall apart within hours. After a series of leaks from the obviously skeptical Chicago Police Department, Smollett's handlers paired him with a network anchor they could rely on to launder the hoax. In the end, Smollett sat for 16 and a half minutes with Robin Roberts of Good Morning America. Roberts surely knew there was ample evidence that Smollett was lying, but she decided to ignore that. Instead, Roberts colluded with him. She nodded empathetically as Smollett wept on camera. She asked no significant follow-up questions. The two parted like old friends. Both Smollett and Roberts turned out to be talented actors. Check out their performance on YouTube before it's scrubbed. You'll never watch ABC News again. Virtually every word they utter is dishonest. Smollett began by explaining that the men who attacked him were not muggers. They didn't want money. They assaulted him purely because of his identity as a gay black Democrat. People like Jussie Smollett aren't allowed to live in Donald Trump's America. That was the message of the attackers. This is MAGA country, they screamed. They were referring, of course, to Chicago, a city where 88% of the population voted against Donald Trump. As a crime story, it didn't make a lot of sense. And when skeptics on the internet raised basic questions about his story, Smollett attacked them as racist.
If I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more. And that says a lot about the place that we are in our country right now. The fact that we have these fear mongers, these people that are trying to separate us, and it's just not okay.
What you just heard is a near-perfect inversion of the truth. As Smollett himself might have put it, who exactly is the fear-mongrel here? Who is dividing us? And who exactly is the victim in all of this? Well, Smollett claims that he's the victim. He tells us that he represents the most despised and unfashionable groups in America. That's why bigots doubt his story. The rest of us nod as if this were true because we're required to do that. That's how dishonest our society has become. Everyone must lie all the time. We know the rules. We have no choice. Meanwhile, our leaders immediately jumped to the defense of this supposedly unpopular person before even hearing the evidence. Within hours, at least two presidential candidates had described what happened to Smollett as a, quote, attempted lynching. They assumed on faith that he must be telling the truth. By definition, they smeared anyone who doubted him. They called him a hero. Is this the treatment that marginalized people receive? No, hardly. Smollett isn't powerless, far from it. His power lies in pretending that he has no power. In fact, Jussie Smollett and his promoters are the aggressors in this story. They launched a calculated campaign of slander against an entire group of people who have far less wealth and far less cultural influence than they have. If there's a bias crime here, they committed it. Will anyone be held accountable for this? Don't bet on it. In 1987, Al Sharpton introduced the media to a young woman called Tawana Brawley. Brawley had an awful story to tell. She said she'd been viciously raped by a group of racist white men and left in a garbage bag. She was covered in feces with racial slurs scrawled on her body. The Brawley case dominated headlines across the country for more than a year, and it bitterly divided New York City along ethnic lines. People hated each other because of what Tawana Brawley said happened to her. But it was all a lie. After conducting hundreds of interviews, a grand jury declared the entire story fraudulent. None of it actually happened. Brawley fled the state. A judge ordered Al Sharpton to pay for damages for accusing innocent men of rape. That should have been the end of Al Sharpton's career, yet just the opposite happened. Before he promoted Tawana Brawley's lie, Sharpton was best known as a small-time hustler, an FBI informant from Brooklyn, a man who'd once been James Brown's road manager. After he perpetuated the single most destructive racial hoax in memory, Al Sharpton got a promotion. He became a world-famous civil rights leader. He ran for president. He became a policy advisor to Barack Obama. According to visitor logs, Al Sharpton was invited to the Obama White House more than 80 times. He got his own show on MSNBC, which he still has. Sharpton has never apologized or even acknowledged the harm he did to this country by lying about Tawana Brawley. No one has forced him to. The lesson of Al Sharpton was clear to everyone watching. There are no penalties for hate hoaxes. There are only rewards. Not surprisingly, there have been many more since. The incident escalated dramatically after the 2016 election. The Muslim student in Louisiana who claims she was assaulted by racists in Trump hats. The Muslim woman in San Diego who alleged the same. An anti-Asian attack in Minnesota, an anti-gay attack in California, a racial attack in Delaware, racist graffiti at the Air Force Academy, anti-Semitic threats phoned into Jewish community centers. All fake. Those and many, many more. The much-hyped epidemic of hate crimes you've heard so much about essentially is made up. The premise is absurd. America is not a hateful country. It's the most welcoming place on earth. That's why, even as our children learn from their teachers what a bigoted country this is, millions continue to stream in from Africa and Latin America for a better life here. It's why we've welcomed more refugees and immigrants than any nation in history. It's why we rescued a young Ilhan Omar from a refugee camp in Kenya. We are kind people. You see it in your own life. How many violent racists do you know personally? None, probably. That's because there aren't many in America. The left has to invent them. Stoking race hatred ensures continued power for the Democratic Party. Divided populations are easier to manipulate and rule. There would be no Democratic coalition without racial animosity. It's what holds their constituencies together. That's the point of identity politics. It's why they're forever reopening the wound. It's why Al Sharpton is still a revered figure among Democratic office holders. But the cost to the country has been high. Ask the kids from Covington Catholic. For the crime of having unfashionable political beliefs and skin color, a group of entirely innocent high school students came close to having their lives destroyed. That didn't happen by accident. The national media did it. They concocted a hate crime out of nothing. The Twitter mob then demanded that those boys be expelled from school and marked for life. Their parents were threatened. Their classmates were harassed. After 2 days, video surfaced proving that none of it was real. The mob moved on. But what if exculpatory video had not emerged? CNN panels would still be screaming for their blood. You sometimes hear people wonder why the media never seem to learn anything from moments like these, moments when they're exposed as corrupt and reckless. And so the answer to that question is very simple. It never occurs to them that they may be wrong or that they might have something to learn. The media see themselves as teachers, not as students. If you ever tried to put a sleepy 4-year-old into a snowsuit before school, you know how journalists feel about the audience. It's frustrating when children don't understand or obey, but you've got to keep trying. That's how they feel. Listen as that oily media reporter kid from CNN explains that the Jussie Smollett hoax does not in any way reflect poorly on the people who promoted it.
Perhaps the questioning was not tough enough on Good Morning America, but ultimately this is not about the media or about politicians or activists or any of the people that might have been fooled. It's about Jussie.
Oh, yeah. It's about Jussie. It definitely has nothing to do with any of us in the media who uncritically repeated his lies night after night for political effect. It's Jussie's problem now. That's Nancy Pelosi's new position, too, by the way. Almost immediately after Smollett's story hit the newswires, the Speaker of the House denounced the racist and homophobic attack. Quote, "May we all commit to ending this hate once and for all." Pelosi has since deleted that tweet. She has not apologized for her own role in perpetuating that hate. Pelosi should apologize, and not simply because it's good manners. Hate hoaxes make ethnic groups fear and distrust each other. That's a dangerous thing to do in a country that's becoming more diverse by the day. The only way to prevent future Tawana Brawleys and Jussie Smollett's is for the people who've promoted these lies to acknowledge what they've done, ask for forgiveness for doing it, and pledge to stop judging others on the basis of racial stereotypes. We need to resolve the Jussie Smollett story. We can't just move on to the next thing and act like it never happened, which is their plan. Smollett himself made that point, actually, at the end of his interview on Good Morning America. Watch.
I still want to believe, with everything that has happened, that there's something called justice.
We've got that in common. Something called justice. We all want to believe in that. Well, more on the Jussie Smollett story after the break. It is still developing. Why were the police skeptical of the story from day one, while journalists whose job it is to divide truth from falsehood swallowed it whole? We'll investigate. We'll be right back.
This this is happening for a reason. Why all of a sudden do we have people unable to study while black, unable to mow a lawn while black, unable to have a picnic while black, and being attacked? It's coming from the President of the United States. He's dog whistling every day.
Well, victim is now the highest honor that the American ruling class can bestow on a citizen. It's like the Victoria Cross was in the First World War. For 3 weeks, Jussie Smollett wore the victimhood mantle. Of course, it appears to be now a sham. Instead, Smollett was likely the one victimizing other people. If the press controlled things, he would have gotten away with it. But local police were skeptical from the very beginning, it looked like. They did the hard investigative work. And they apparently exposed a bizarre plot that nobody would have predicted at the outset. Mark Morgan was the head of the Border Patrol under President Obama. Before that, he spent more than 20 years at the FBI. He joins us tonight. Mr. Morgan, thanks very much for coming on. Underneath all of this is the larger story of Chicago, which has an epidemic of shootings and murders, 3,000 shootings last year. Fewer than 1 in 6 murders is solved in Chicago. And as I watched this thing play out over the past couple weeks, I kept thinking, what is the manpower that's being diverted from actual crimes to work on this fake crime?
So that's one of the most infuriating parts about this. So they have a shooting about every 2.5 hours and homicide about every 12 hours. And so the detectives here, the Chicago PD, even though they were skeptical from the start, they still took this serious, and they did an outstanding investigative job here. They devoted 12 or 15 senior detectives, experienced detectives, around the clock to work on that. Do the math. They could have been doing other stuff, solving real crimes to help the city of Chicago. Instead, they're chasing this.
I mean, if this is what it appears to be, that seems like an actual crime. I can't remember. Well, we were just talking about Sharpton, who's got a show on another channel, richer and happier than ever, perpetuated the greatest race hoax in my lifetime and walks free. Do you think Smollett will face a similar bright future after this?
Well, I hope so. If like you said, Tucker, and I think you've been very fair and balanced, if the evidence does show where it's leaning, the district attorney should take this before the grand jury, get a true bill of indictment, which means he will be arrested. It's a class 4 felony, I believe, in Chicago. It's serious time. And then I hope the Chicago PD writes out a bill and makes him pay for their services.
Do you think it's possible that Andy Lack at NBC will hire him too to join Sharpton and kind of maybe a race hoax block?
So I hope
MSNBC. I couldn't resist.
A different time, but yeah.
The criminal penalties, though. I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone is ever charged. I can think of a long list off the top of my head of hate hoaxes in the past couple of years. I can't remember anyone doing time for it.
Well, what I will say, and this what most investigators and detectives will tell you, that, falsifying claims, this isn't anything new. This happens on a regular basis. And I think that's why, from a law enforcement perspective, Tucker, we're so frustrated, because it's not just a rush of judgment to assume every allegation is fact. What you've seen is a step further. They're not just accepting every allegation as fact, but they're also immediately placing blame hours after it happened.
What happens to a society in which people's skin color makes them more believable or less believable? I thought that's what we were against. And yet I saw a lot of people, when we played the clips earlier, saying this guy looks a certain way, therefore you must believe him. Isn't that what was wrong with the Jim Crow South, that people had that attitude?
Exactly right. I mean, let's be honest. We're already taking a country that is very divided on this issue.
Yes.
And when something like this happens, what happens? It just further divides us. And I hope, if the evidence shows, I hope the DA does the right thing and holds him accountable.
I wonder after a while if the pressure doesn't become so intense that justice is no longer blind. I mean, maybe justice is never blind, but we should be trying for that, I would hope. Have we given up trying?
I can tell you Chicago PD hasn't given up. They did the right thing, even though they were skeptical, right, from the start.
Right.
They still did everything they could. They took this hate crime, which they should, very serious. And the investigative work that they've done, I hope they're able to unpeel that and let the American people know just how difficult it was what they've done. And they did the right thing. So, I think we're okay from a law enforcement perspective. They're still going to do the right thing. And I hope, Tucker, that the divide also, the anti-law enforcement movement, I hope this serves that law enforcement. Nope, they're still going to do their job. No matter the vile things that are said about law enforcement, Chicago PD did exactly what they should do.
Seems that way. It just makes everyone hate each other. It's so sad. This stuff is. Mr. Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Well, the press blasted Smollett's original allegation to the entire country, as they did with Covington, the fake Duke lacrosse rape, the fake rapes at UVA, and a lot of other stories that conveniently confirmed their own personal biases. They learned nothing from any of these hoaxes, which again, they helped perpetuate. Instead, they prefer to forget they ever happened. Will this time be any different? Robby Soave is really the world's living expert on this question. He is associate editor at Reason.com, author of the book Panic Attack, Young Radicals in the Age of Trump, and he joins us today. Robby, when last you were on the commercial break, I said, since you really are, I think of as like an expert on hoaxes like this, I said, if we find out more about the Smollett case, I hope you'll come back, and you have. So my first question is, what about these stats that you often hear about hate crimes? I have them thrown at me all the time. 1 in 5 Americans will die in a hate crime or whatever. They seem very large, these numbers. Are they real?
The short answer is no. If you look very carefully, it's easy to misrepresent them. So there was an increase from 2016 to 2017 in the number of hate crimes. But if you look, that's actually just because more agencies reported data to the federal government.
Right.
So just counting the issue more accurately will make it look like the problem's getting worse, when really there were just fewer people participating in this scheme to count hate crimes the year before. Statistics about anti-Semitic hate incidents that the Anti-Defamation League has talked about. I looked at those. They said there was a 60% increase since Trump was elected. Actually, anti-Semitic violence was way down, and what was up was that one deranged teenager who actually lived in Israel had sent a bunch of bomb threats to Jewish institutions. So that was the entire swing, was just him doing that. I mean, these were small numbers of overall crime, so it's easy to change depending on how you count it and how you tally it. It looks like, oh, it's happening and it's rising, and we can easily point to why that is, but that couldn't be further from the truth.
So what you have is interest groups feeding misleading statistics to the media, but in this specific case, the media don't push back or dig deep. So in other words, if Philip Morris says to me, Marlboros are actually good for your health, I might want to Google it myself. But when these groups when the Southern Poverty Law Center sends fake stats to New York Times, they don't check.
Right, and their stats weren't even scientific. They were just surveys of their own members, who of course are very intimately interested in promoting the idea that there's this surge in kind of hate crimes. And the media institutions, when you read their stories, they just lead with the headline of this is the figure that the activist group says, and then maybe, many paragraphs down, if you're lucky, you get oh, by the way, actually, this is comparing apples to oranges because of some change in how the things
You're one of the only people I know, which is why I love talking to you, in the media, maybe because you're not aligned on either side, who follows up on the hoaxes. No one else seems to. Are there stats kept on this?
It is so hard to tell what percentage of these kinds of things are hoaxes. I've been trying to figure this out for a long time. A lot of times, if we're talking about, for instance, the college bias incident, where someone does something that might not even be criminal, but it violates the college policy or something racially offensive. Or, oftentimes they're just not solved. When they are solved, it seems to me, from my looking into it, that a lot of the time it ends up being a hoax. That's just from which ones I see get solved. A lot of times we just have no idea. So I can't say.
But I don't know. Of the cases that have been solved, off the top of your head, what percentage would you say are fraudulent?
It could be as many as every other, probably.
Wow. Okay. So you're talking about a long line. A lot of line. No surprise there. Robby, great to see you. Congrats on the book.
Thank you.
Andrew McCabe says the FBI schemed to remove the president, their boss, from office. What is happening at DOJ? We have an update after the break. Plus, instead of covering her presidential campaign, journalists are giving Kamala Harris fashion tips. They're hard-boiled shoe leather reporters. More examples of them at work after the break. Andrew McCabe's much-hyped 60 Minutes interview aired last night. During it, McCabe says that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein offered to wear a wire, a secret recording device, in order to collect evidence on his boss, President Trump. Watch.
The Deputy Attorney General offered to wear a wire into the White House. He said, I never get searched when I go into the White House. I could easily wear a recording device. They wouldn't know it was there. Now, he was not joking. He was absolutely serious. And in fact, he brought it up in the next meeting we had.
Crazy people. Well, after that aired, the president tweeted that McCabe and Rosenstein engaged in, quote, illegal and treasonous behavior. But maybe the most amazing thing is that as of right now, 8:33 Eastern Time, Rod Rosenstein is still the Deputy Attorney General of the United States of America. How does that happen? Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Hanson, he is still the Deputy Attorney General. Now, I mean, at some point, you know, the president's his boss. I mean, that's what the Constitution says. I'm getting confused as to how this is continuing.
Yeah, I think he created a pseudo-immunity where the media and politicos said that if Rod Rosenstein was let go, then it was tampered into the Mueller investigation, which was false. But on that clip you played, Andrew McCabe is not a psychiatrist. He's not an internal physician. Neither is Rod Rosenstein. They knew the constitutional limits of the 25th Amendment. It's an incapacitated president, like a Woodrow Wilson, maybe the last week of FDR. It's not a president you happen to disagree with. So what they're basically discussing is how to overthrow or abort a presidency that was duly elected. One of the most disturbing things, Tucker, of the Pelley interview was the high school journalism. We know he came onto the scene, remember, Tucker, with the word insurance policy under the struck page text.
Yes.
Why wasn't he asked what that insurance policy was? Insurance policy, or why wasn't he asked why he went to a FISA court and did not apprise the judge that that dossier that he said was the chief piece of evidence to get a warrant on a U.S. citizen was not verified, the author had been fired, and most importantly, it was a product of Hillary Clinton's campaign. He didn't say any of that, nor was he asked in that interview. So not only is he engaging in really unethical and maybe even unconstitutional behavior, but he has a record of leaking, according to the Inspector General, of not telling the truth, and then deceiving a court, as does James Comey. And what I get, and you've mentioned this, Tucker, but what really gets us upset, us being the American people, we have these sanctimonious, Boy Scout, self-righteous James Clapper, John Brennan, James Comey, Peter Strzok, Andrew McCabe, and they feel that somehow they've got a rationale or prerogative to be divinities, and they can tell people when a president should go and when he should come, and when what a court needs to know, what he doesn't, when they can leak confidential information, when they can 245 times tell under oath a House Intelligence Committee they don't know. And we can't do that, us the people. But they've created a hierarchy or some type of cadre in Washington. They're like a Praetorian Guard where they're not subject to the limitations that we all enjoy as constitutional limitations on what you can do.
Well, does it strike you
when
as...
you mix that with self-righteousness, higher loyalty, the threat, all this psychodramatic language, it's really depressing.
Well, it's depressing, it's
I've never seen
infuriating,
anything like it.
But isn't it also ironic that all of this is being conducted in the name of protecting democracy? They're subverting a democratically elected office holder of their boss in the name of protecting democracy. Is anyone self-aware enough to get this over there, do you think?
I don't think so. I think they feel it's Trump is a special case, and that would be the best take on it. The worst case is that they thought all along that Hillary Clinton, when they started all of this during the campaign, was going to be elected, and that behavior would not only be excused, if not rewarded. And then once that failed, they thought, well, now we'll take this campaign effort, the dossier, and then we'll board a presidency. When he says he opened up a counterintelligence investigation, he had no grounds for doing so. All he had was the rumors and the smears and the slanders and the fumes of this discredited dossier that he'd been told in 2016 by Bruce Ohr himself was unverified, and that his own spouse worked on it. So that's all just rhetoric. When he said to Scott Pelley, well, you know, I was opening up a counterintelligence investigation. Not only doesn't he have the right to do that, but he had no evidence to do that.
Well, exactly.
Now, he's not Andrew McCabe, MD. He's not a doctor. He's not a constitutional lawyer. If he has a problem with Donald Trump and thinks he's done something wrong, that's a matter for the U.S. Congress to introduce articles of impeachment.
Yeah, quit and write a Times op-ed about it if you want. Yeah, I agree. Professor, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, Democrats running for president have a new rallying cry for 2020. Tear down every wall that protects this country. Why are they saying that exactly? Who would benefit from that? We'll ask the question after the break. Well, a profound moral revolution is sweeping the Democratic Party. When we say profound, we mean profound. This is like the Reformation, except instead of 95 theses, there's just one thesis. Walls are bad! Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York and Beto O'Rourke, who's on like a one-man road trip somewhere in Texas, are both running for president. And they put this new thesis in no uncertain terms. Walls must be torn down.
If you could, would you take the wall down now? Here.
Yes.
Like you have a wall.
Absolutely.
Knock it down.
I'd take the wall down.
And do you think the city, if there's a referendum here in this city, that would pass?
I do.
The idea of dismantling some of the wall, good idea, bad idea?
Well, I'd have to ask folks in that part of the country to see whether the fencing that exists today is helpful or unhelpful. So I could look at it and see which part he means and why, and if it makes sense, I could support it.
Tear down those walls! And they're not alone in that. Young pioneer Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says a wall to protect our country is very much like another wall built to imprison a population. Listen to this.
No matter how you feel about the wall, you know, I think it's a moral abomination. I think it's like the Berlin Wall.
The Berlin Wall! What city did that divide? That's the question I want to ask AOC. Jason Nichols is a professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland. He joins us today. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Hey, anytime.
So I was a little bit shocked. Here, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is criticizing East Germany. She's not the person I thought she was.
No, I mean, so again, when she says that walls are immoral, I think what she's not saying, and I don't think anyone believes that walls in and of themselves are immoral. I think what they're saying is that something that walls us off from our allies rather than our enemies is immoral. Somewhere where we're not being invaded, that's what makes it immoral. The fact that it's a physical manifestation of the racism that's coming out of the White House, that's what makes it immoral. Huh. You know, the fact that it's, you know, that it's a wall.
Okay, but Beto O'Rourke says that we should tear the walls down that exist on our southern border. Now, I'm pretty sure I understand that Beto is an extremely rich man. I think he married into a billionaire family, okay?
Did he?
So I bet you he's got some pretty stout locks on his doors at home. Why should he be allowed to have those? Why is that not racist?
Well, so,
why aren't they keeping people of color out of his house? I'm serious.
No, I don't think that's what... I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Well, really? Why?
I think, well, when you look at it, that area around El Paso did not really have walls for a long, and we shouldn't even call this a wall. We know it's a gate, a fence.
Well, whatever. It's a physical barrier to keep people out.
Physical barrier. Now, that physical barrier is relatively new.
Right.
And when you go back to 1995 and you look at the trends of violent crime in El Paso, it's always been one of the safest cities in America.
Right.
So it's not like a physical barrier was built and all of a sudden people got safer. It was always a safe city.
Well, but that's absolutely right. And it's a wonderful city, by the way. El Paso is a great place with great people in it. But the city right across the river,
absolutely,
Juarez, was the most dangerous city in the hemisphere. And so they built the wall to keep the dangerous people out during the drug war. That would be fair, right? I mean, that's not racist to do that,
I understand. I totally understand the motivation for building that barrier, particularly, you know, we were in a post 9/11 time where people were afraid of many different things coming from other countries. However, when we look at it statistically, before the gate, there was nothing.
Well, that's
because wasn't violent.
No, that's
even
because,
and Juarez has been violent for a very long time.
But it got really bad, and I think I'm just pulling this out of my head, but I think it's right. I think El Paso is a majority Hispanic city, and I think that wall was built with the approval of most people in El Paso, not because they don't like Hispanics, but because there was an actual threat right across the way, and it sort of served everybody. So it doesn't need to be a race dispute.
Well, the other thing is that Juarez is the Juarez of 2005 is not the Juarez of 2019. I think we can agree there that it went through a period of extreme violence, but it's not quite as violent now.
So I guess the way you're thinking about this is if there isn't what you consider a threat, then you don't have a right to protect yourself. So Beto O'Rourke lives in a pretty safe neighborhood. Most rich people do. Why should they be allowed to lock their doors? I honestly don't understand. Why is that not racist?
Locking your doors is very different than having
What do you mean?
a
It's
physical barrier.
keeping. Look, you're surrounded by allies, and a locked door treats them like enemies. That's what I think the message of Beto's front door is. It's like, what, you don't like me enough to let me in? Isn't the right of migration into Beto's house an absolute right?
Well, first of all, we know when it comes to migration on our southern border, people come through legal ports of entry. We also know the vast majority, and when we talk about undocumented immigration, most of the people, you know, it used to be people said 40% of the people just overstayed a visa.
Right.
Now the, you know, new studies are saying as many as 66% of our undocumented people come on airplanes.
Yeah, I think that may be right.
overstay
That may be
visas.
right. So you get 33% are coming across the border. Let's start there. But I just want to get really quick. They're talking now, and AOC, the Young Pioneer, is talking about the right of migration. Why doesn't that apply to Beto's yard? And again, I'm asking, why don't I have a right of migration there? What makes him special?
Well, again, I don't know if he has a gate around his yard, but, you know,
I hope
again,
he doesn't.
I think, you know, private property is different than, he's not worried.
Than a country. Okay, they're telling me I have to go, but we have an excellent conversation for next time on private property. I hope you'll come back.
Will do.
Thank you,
All right,
Professor.
thanks, Tucker.
Well, there's an epidemic of pouncing underway in this country. The Republicans are pouncing on people. We've got the sad details ahead on that.